Marcus Thompson had always been the quiet guy at Henderson Community College. At 22, he worked part-time at the campus bookstore while studying mechanical engineering. His classmates knew him as the guy who fixed their broken laptops and helped with math homework. Nobody really paid attention to the small, intricate tattoo on his left shoulder blade that occasionally showed when he rolled up his sleeves. The tattoo looked like geometric patterns mixed with what seemed like random numbers and symbols. When people asked about it, Marcus would just shrug and say it was something he got when he was 18, right after high school. He'd laugh it off, saying it was a stupid decision he made with friends. Most people believed him because Marcus seemed like the type who might do something impulsive and regret it later. The spring semester was particularly busy. Marcus was taking advanced calculus, physics, and mechanical design courses. His professors liked him because he always submitted clean, precise work. He had a natural talent for understanding complex systems and breaking them down into simpler parts. This skill made him popular among struggling students who often sought his help during study sessions in the library. One Thursday afternoon, Marcus was helping Sarah Chen with her thermodynamics homework when Professor Williams walked by their table. Professor Williams taught military history and had served in the Army for 15 years before becoming an educator. He was known for his sharp eyes and attention to detail. As he passed their table, Marcus reached across to point out an equation in Sarah's textbook, and his shirt sleeve rode up slightly. Professor Williams stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes locked onto the tattoo, and his face went completely pale. Marcus noticed the professor staring and quickly pulled his sleeve down, but it was too late. Professor Williams had seen enough. The older man's hand started shaking slightly and he gripped his coffee cup tighter. "Marcus," Professor Williams said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Sarah looked confused as Marcus reluctantly followed the professor to a quiet corner of the library. Other students continued studying, unaware that something significant was happening just a few tables away. Professor Williams kept glancing around, nervously as if he was worried someone might be watching them. "Where did you get that tattoo?" Professor Williams asked, his voice still quiet but now carrying an edge of urgency. Marcus gave his usual response about getting it done with friends after high school, but Professor Williams shook his head impatiently. "No, son, that's not just any tattoo. Those symbols, those numbers, I've seen them before. That's not some random design from a tattoo parlor." The professor pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a photo he had taken years ago during his military service. It was a document with similar symbols and number patterns. "This was from a classified briefing I attended in 2018. These symbols were part of a communication system used for highly sensitive operations." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had always known there was something different about his tattoo, but he never imagined it could be connected to military secrets. The truth was, he hadn't gotten the tattoo with friends. He had found the design in his late father's belongings after the funeral. His father had been in the military but never talked about his service. Marcus thought the design was just something his father had drawn, maybe a personal symbol or artwork. "Professor, I need to tell you something," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "I didn't get this tattoo with friends. I found this design in my father's old military papers after he died 3 years ago. I thought it was just something he had drawn. I got it tattooed because I wanted to have something that connected me to him." Professor Williams's expression changed from suspicion to concern. "What was your father's name and rank?" "Staff Sergeant David Thompson. He served from 1995 to 2015, mostly overseas assignments. He never talked about his work, said it was boring paperwork and logistics stuff." The professor was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out a small notebook and wrote something down. "Marcus, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't show that tattoo to anyone else. Don't talk about this conversation. I need to make some phone calls." As Professor Williams walked away, Marcus sat alone at the library table, his mind racing. Sarah had already packed up her books and left, probably thinking their study session was over. Marcus stared at his covered shoulder, wondering what his ideal father had really been involved in during his 20 years of military service. That evening, Marcus went back to his small apartment and pulled out the box of his father's belongings that he had stored in his closet. He had gone through these items dozens of times before, looking for clues about the man who had raised him but never shared much about his past. Tonight, he looked at everything with fresh eyes, searching for anything that might explain the significance of the tattoo now permanently etched into his skin. Hidden behind a photograph, Marcus found a small piece of paper with a phone number and the words, "Emergency Contact, Colonel Hayes," written in his father's handwriting. The paper looked old and had been folded many times. Marcus had never seen this before, and he wondered if he should call the number. As he held the paper in his hands, he realized that getting his father's design tattooed on his body might have been the biggest mistake of his life. Professor Williams couldn't concentrate on his evening classes. The image of Marcus's tattoo kept replaying in his mind. Those symbols weren't just familiar. They were identical to markings he had seen during his time with military intelligence. He had been part of a special unit that dealt with encrypted communications and code-breaking operations. The patterns on Marcus's shoulder were definitely part of a classification system he had encountered during a mission in Eastern Europe. After his last class ended at 9 o'clock, Professor Williams drove straight to his home office. He pulled out files he hadn't touched in years, documents from his military service that he was technically still authorized to possess. Most veterans had to return sensitive materials, but his clearance level had allowed him to keep certain reference documents for consulting work he occasionally did for the Department of Defense. He spread the papers across his desk and began comparing them to the mental image of Marcus's tattoo. The geometric patterns matched perfectly with a communication protocol used by a unit called Deep Cover Assets, soldiers who worked undercover in foreign countries, gathering intelligence on terrorist networks and weapons trafficking operations. The numbers embedded in the design weren't random at all. They represented coordinates, dates, and operation codes. Professor Williams realized he was looking at something that could potentially identify an active or former deep cover operative. If Marcus's father, Staff Sergeant David Thompson, had been part of this unit, it would explain why he never talked about his work. These soldiers lived double lives, often spending months or years embedded in dangerous situations, pretending to be civilians while gathering crucial intelligence. The next morning, Professor Williams called his former commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Hayes, who now worked at the Pentagon in intelligence coordination. She was the same person whose number Marcus had found in his father's belongings, though neither of them knew this yet. "Pat, I need to run something by you. I've got a student here who has a tattoo with symbols that match the DCA identification protocols we used in 2018. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Jim, you know I can't discuss those operations, even with you. The kid says his father was Staff Sergeant David Thompson, served from 95 to 2015. Does that name mean anything to you?" Another silence. Then Colonel Hayes's voice became very serious. "Where are you right now, Jim?" "At the college, in my office. Don't discuss this over the phone anymore. I'm sending someone to talk to you and the student. This needs to be handled through proper channels." Professor Williams spent the rest of the morning trying to act normal during his classes, but his mind kept wandering. He had worked with enough classified operations to know that when the Pentagon sends someone to investigate, it means the situation is potentially serious. He wondered if Marcus had any idea what his innocent decision to honor his father might have unleashed. During lunch break, Professor Williams found Marcus in the engineering lab, working on a project involving hydraulic systems. The young man was completely absorbed in his work, adjusting pressure valves and taking measurements. He looked so normal, so ordinary, that it was hard to believe he might be carrying state secrets on his body. "Marcus, we need to talk again." Marcus looked up from his project, and Professor Williams could see the worry in his eyes. "Is everything okay, Professor? I made some calls about what we discussed yesterday. Some people are going to want to speak with you. Official people." Marcus set down his tools and leaned against the workbench. "What kind of official people?" "The kind that your father used to work with. The kind that take tattoos like yours very seriously." That afternoon, Marcus couldn't focus on any of his classes. His mind kept drifting to memories of his father, The long absences, the phone calls David would take in another room, the way he sometimes seemed to be listening for sounds that weren't there. Marcus had always attributed these behaviors to general military training, but now he was beginning to wonder if there had been much more to his father's service than he ever imagined. When Marcus got home, he called the number he had found in his father's belongings. A professional-sounding woman answered on the second ring. "Colonel Hayes's office, this is Lieutenant Morrison." "Hi, my name is Marcus Thompson. My father was Staff Sergeant David Thompson. I found this number in his things, and I was told I might need to call it. Please hold, Mr. Thompson." The hold lasted for what felt like forever, though it was probably only 2 minutes. When someone came back on the line, it was a different voice, older, more authoritative. "Mr. Thompson, this is Colonel Hayes. I worked with your father. We need to meet as soon as possible. Are you available tomorrow morning?" "Yes, ma'am. But can you tell me what this is about?" "Not over the phone. Meet me at Henderson Community College tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'll find you through Professor Williams. And Marcus, don't discuss this with anyone else, not even your closest friends or family members. This is very important." After hanging up, Marcus sat in his apartment feeling like his whole world had shifted. 3 days ago, he was just a regular college student worried about passing his physics exam. Now he was apparently involved in something serious enough to bring a Pentagon colonel to his small-town college. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and tried to see the tattoo on his shoulder blade. Using a hand mirror, he studied the design more carefully than he ever had before. The symbols that he had always thought were just artistic patterns now looked more deliberate, more purposeful. Each line and number seemed to be placed exactly where it needed to be. Marcus realized that his decision to permanently mark his body with his father's design might have revealed secrets that were supposed to stay buried forever. As he tried to sleep that night, he wondered if his father would be proud that his son wanted to honor him, or horrified that military secrets were now exposed for anyone to see. Colonel Patricia Hayes arrived at Henderson Community College in an unmarked black sedan at exactly 10 a.m. She was a woman in her early 50s with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She wore civilian clothes, a dark business suit that made her look like any other professional visiting the campus. Only Professor Williams recognized the military bearing in the way she walked and held herself. Marcus was waiting in Professor Williams' office, his leg bouncing nervously as he sat in a chair across from the professor's desk. When Colonel Hayes knocked and entered, the room suddenly felt much smaller. She introduced herself politely, but Marcus could sense an intensity about her that made him even more nervous. "Mr. Thompson, I want to start by saying that your father was one of the finest soldiers I ever had the privilege to work with. David Thompson saved many lives during his service, and his country owes him a debt that can never be fully repaid." Marcus felt a mix of pride and confusion. "Ma'am, my father always told me he just did paperwork and logistics. He said his job was boring." Colonel Hayes exchanged a glance with Professor Williams before continuing. "Your father's real job was anything but boring, son. He was part of a highly classified unit that operated in some of the most dangerous places in the world. We couldn't tell families the truth because it would put everyone at risk, the soldiers and their loved ones." She opened a briefcase and pulled out a photograph of a group of soldiers in desert camouflage. She pointed to a man in the back row. "That's your father in Afghanistan in 2008. He was leading a team that was tracking weapons smugglers who were selling explosives to terrorist groups." Marcus stared at the photograph. His father looked younger and more serious than Marcus remembered him. There was something in David's eyes in this photo, a hardness that Marcus had never seen during their quiet evenings at home watching baseball games. "The tattoo on your shoulder contains operational codes that were specific to your father's missions. Those symbols indicate locations where he gathered intelligence, and the numbers reference dates and contact protocols. If the wrong people saw that information, it could endanger other operatives who might still be active in the field." Marcus felt sick to his stomach. "I had no idea. I just wanted something to remember him by. The design was in his papers, and I thought it was just something he had drawn." Colonel Hayes's expression softened slightly. "I understand why you did it, Marcus, and I want you to know that your father kept that design because it represented some of his most important work missions where he helped prevent attacks that could have killed hundreds of innocent people. Professor Williams leaned forward in his chair. Colonel, what does this mean for Marcus now? Is he in any danger? That depends on several factors. The good news is that the specific operations referenced in the tattoo were completed years ago, and most of the intelligence networks have been dismantled or relocated. The concern is that there are still people out there who might recognize these symbols and try to use Marcus to get information about his father's work. Marcus ran his hands through his hair. But I don't know anything about my father's real job. I can't tell anyone anything because I don't know anything. Unfortunately, certain hostile groups might not believe that. They might think your father shared classified information with you, or that you have access to his operational files. Colonel. Hayes pulled out another document from her briefcase. I've been authorized to offer you 3 options, Marcus. First, we can arrange to have the tattoo surgically removed and covered with a skin graft. The military will pay for the procedure and any follow-up care. Marcus instinctively reached toward his shoulder. The thought of removing his father's design felt like losing the last connection he had to the man who raised him. Second, we can relocate you to a different state with a new identity. You would finish your education under a different name, and we would provide financial support until you're established in a career. The idea of giving up his entire life terrified Marcus. He thought about his friends at college, his part-time job, the small apartment where he kept his father's belongings. What's the third option? Colonel Hayes paused before answering. The third option is the most risky, but it might appeal to someone with your father's sense of duty. You could work with us to help identify and monitor potential threats. If anyone approaches you asking questions about your father or the tattoo, you would report it immediately. In exchange, you would receive training in personal security and continue living your normal life, but with our protection. Marcus looked back and forth between the Colonel and Professor Williams. If I choose the third option, would I be helping to continue the kind of work my father did? In a way, yes. Your father spent his career protecting innocent people from those who would harm them. If you helped us identify security threats, you would be continuing that mission. Professor Williams spoke up. Marcus, you don't have to decide right now. This is a big choice that will affect the rest of your life. Colonel Hayes nodded in agreement. Take some time to think about it, but I need an answer within 48 hours. In the meantime, be very careful about who you're around and what you discuss. Don't show the tattoo to anyone else. And if anyone asks you unusual questions about your father or your family history, call me immediately. She handed Marcus a secure phone, a simple device that looked like it was designed for emergency use only. This phone has my direct number programmed into it. It's encrypted, so our conversations will be private. As Colonel Hayes prepared to leave, she turned back to Marcus one final time. Your father would be proud of the man you've become, but he would also want you to be safe. Whatever decision you make it because it's what you believe is right for your future. After she left, Marcus and Professor Williams sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Marcus spoke. Professor, what would you do if you were me, Professor? Williams took off his glasses and cleaned them carefully before answering. I'd ask myself what kind of life I could live with and what kind of legacy I want to leave. Your father made choices that helped protect people, but those choices also meant he had to keep secrets from the people he loved most. Only you can decide if that's a burden you're willing to carry. Marcus spent the next day trying to act normal, but everything felt different. He attended his classes, worked his shift at the bookstore, and ate dinner alone in his apartment, but his mind was constantly processing the information Colonel Hayes had shared with him. Every person who looked at him for more than a few seconds made him wonder if they had noticed something unusual. That evening, while Marcus was studying in the library, a man approached his table. The stranger was probably in his 30s, with dark hair and an accent that sounded Eastern European. He was well-dressed in an expensive-looking jacket and carried a leather briefcase. Excuse me, are you Marcus Thompson? The man asked with a polite smile. Marcus immediately felt his heart rate increase. Yes. Why? My name is Victor Petrov. I am a journalist writing an article about military families, and how they cope with the loss of loved ones who served overseas. I understand your father was in the military. Everything about this interaction felt wrong to Marcus. How did this man know his name? How did he know about his father? Marcus tried to keep his voice steady. I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in being interviewed. Victor sat down in the chair across from Marcus without being invited. I think you might change your mind when you hear what I have to say. You see, I have been researching soldiers who worked in certain special operations units. Your father's name came up in some documents I obtained. Marcus closed his textbook and started putting his things in his backpack. I really need to go. Wait, Victor said, reaching across the table and placing his hand on Marcus's arm. I know about the tattoo. Marcus froze. The library suddenly felt too quiet, too empty. Most of the other students had left hours ago, and the librarian was somewhere in the back office. Marcus realized he was essentially alone with this stranger who somehow knew about the most classified thing in his life. I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus said, but his voice betrayed his nervousness. Victor smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. Marcus, I know exactly what symbols are tattooed on your left shoulder blade. I know they represent operational codes from missions your father completed between 2010 and 2014. What I don't know is what other information your father might have shared with you. Marcus's mind raced back to Colonel Hayes's warnings. This was exactly the kind of situation she had described. My father never told me anything about his work. I don't have any information. Perhaps. But you see, I represent people who lost a great deal of money because of operations your father was involved in, weapons shipments that were intercepted, financial networks that were disrupted. My associates are very interested in recovering what was taken from them. Victor opened his briefcase and showed Marcus photographs of weapons and stacks of money. Your father cost my employers millions of dollars. They believe he may have kept records of bank accounts, safe house locations, or contact information for other operatives. Marcus tried to stand up, but Victor grabbed his wrist firmly. Sit down, we're not finished talking. Let go of me, Marcus said, his voice louder than he intended. Victor looked around the empty library and tightened his grip. Lower your voice. I'm going to give you my business card. You have 1 week to think about whether you want to cooperate with us voluntarily, or whether we need to persuade you in other ways. He released Marcus's wrist and placed a white business card on the table. Call me when you decide you want to help us. And Marcus, we know where you live, where you work, and where you go to school. We also know that you don't have any other family members to worry about, which makes this situation much simpler for everyone involved. Victor stood up and adjusted his jacket. 1 week, he repeated, then walked out of the library. Marcus sat, alone at the table for several minutes, his hand shaking slightly. He looked at the business card, which simply had a phone number printed on it with no name or company information. He pulled out the secure phone Colonel Hayes had given him and dialed her number. She answered immediately. Marcus, what's wrong? Someone just approached me in the library. A man named Victor Petrov. He knew about the tattoo and he knew about my father's missions. He wants information about my father's work. Where are you now? Still in the library at school. Go straight home and lock your doors. Don't stop anywhere. Don't talk to anyone. I'm sending someone to keep an eye on you tonight. We'll meet first thing in the morning. Marcus drove home through empty streets, checking his rearview mirror constantly. Every set of headlights behind him made him nervous. When he finally reached his apartment building, he practically ran from his car to the front door. Inside his apartment, Marcus pulled all the curtains closed and double-checked the locks on his doors. He tried to study, but he couldn't concentrate. Every small sound from outside made him look toward the windows. He realized that his normal quiet life was over, regardless of what decision he made about Colonel Hayes's 3 options. Around midnight, Marcus noticed a dark car parked across the street with someone sitting in the driver's seat. He assumed this was the protection Colonel Hayes had promised, but it didn't make him feel much safer. The presence of the car confirmed that his situation was serious enough to require professional surveillance. Marcus spent most of the night lying awake, thinking about his father's real life and the dangers David had faced every day. For the First time, Marcus understood why his father had sometimes seemed distant or preoccupied. David had been carrying the weight of secrets that could get people killed. As the sun began to rise, Marcus made his decision about which option to choose. The encounter with Viktor Petrov had shown him that running away or trying to pretend the situation didn't exist wouldn't work. These people had found him once, and they could find him again wherever he went. Marcus realized that if he was going to live with his father's legacy permanently marked on his body, he needed to be prepared to face the consequences of that choice. The tattoo wasn't just artwork anymore. It was a responsibility that connected him to his father's mission of protecting innocent people from those who would harm them. When Colonel Hayes called at 7 a.m., Marcus was ready with his answer. Marcus met Colonel Hayes at a small diner outside of town at 8 a.m. She was already sitting in a corner booth when he arrived, positioned so she could see both the entrance and the back exit. Marcus was beginning to notice these kinds of details, now that he understood the world his father had lived in. "I want to choose the third option," Marcus said as soon as he sat down. "I want to help catch these people." Colonel Hayes studied his face carefully. "Are you sure? After what happened last night, you could still choose relocation. We could have you somewhere safe by this afternoon. These people found me once. If I run, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if they're going to find me again. At least, this way I'll be prepared." She nodded slowly. "Your father would say the same thing. He never ran from a fight when innocent people were at risk." She signaled the waitress for coffee. "If we're going to do this, you need to understand what you're signing up for. This isn't a game, and there's no guarantee we can protect you from every possible threat." Over the next hour, Colonel Hayes explained how the operation would work. Marcus would continue his normal routine, attending classes, working at the bookstore, living in his apartment. However, he would receive intensive training in personal security, threat assessment, and communication protocols. Most importantly, he would learn how to gather information without appearing suspicious. The people who approached you aren't just random criminals. They're part of an international network that specializes in recovering assets they believe were stolen from them during military operations. Your father's missions disrupted several of their operations, and they've been trying to track down information about those disruptions for years. Marcus sipped his coffee and tried to process the magnitude of what he was getting involved in. "What exactly do they think I know?" "They believe your father might have kept detailed records of the operations, bank account numbers, safe house locations, names of contacts who worked with him. If that information fell into the wrong hands, it could endanger operatives who are still active and compromise ongoing missions." "Did my father keep those kinds of records?" Colonel Hayes paused before answering. "Your father was thorough in his work, but he followed protocol. Any information he gathered was properly channeled through official networks. However, these criminals don't understand how military intelligence works. They think operatives keep personal files like some kind of spy movie." After breakfast, Colonel Hayes drove Marcus to what looked like an ordinary office building in the next town over. Inside, however, was a training facility equipped with surveillance equipment, communication devices, and rooms set up to simulate different scenarios. Marcus met Agent Sarah Chen, not the same Sarah from his thermodynamics class, but a trained intelligence officer who would be his primary contact and trainer. Agent Chen was probably in her late 20s, with short black hair and an athletic build that suggested she could handle herself in dangerous situations. "The first thing you need to learn," Agent Chen said as she led Marcus through the facility, "is how to recognize when someone is watching you or following you. Most people go through their daily lives completely unaware of their surroundings, but that luxury is no longer available to you." For the next 4 hours, Marcus learned techniques for identifying surveillance, varying his routes between home and school, and spotting people who might be taking unusual interest in his activities. He practiced using reflective surfaces to watch behind him, memorizing license plate numbers, and identifying escape routes in different locations. "Your biggest advantage," Agent Chen explained, "is that you look like a normal college student. Most people won't suspect that someone your age could be involved in anything serious. We need to maintain that appearance while making you much more aware of potential threats." Marcus also learned how to use various communication devices, including the secure phone Colonel Hayes had given him. He was taught code phrases that would immediately signal different types of emergencies and how to leave messages that would appear innocent to anyone who might be monitoring his communications. The most difficult part of the training was learning how to act naturally while constantly being alert for danger. Marcus had to practice having normal conversations with classmates while simultaneously watching for anyone who might be eavesdropping or paying too much attention to what he was saying. The key, Agent Chen said, is to make hypervigilance feel automatic. You want to be scanning your environment and assessing threats without appearing nervous or paranoid to the people around you. By the end of the day, Marcus felt overwhelmed by everything he had learned. His head was full of protocols, procedures, and warnings about dangers he had never imagined. As Agent Chen drove him back to his car, she tried to reassure him. I know, this feels like a lot right now. But these skills will become second nature very quickly. Your father learned the same techniques, and they kept him safe through 20 years of dangerous missions. That evening, Marcus returned to his apartment and tried to study for his upcoming physics exam. However, he found himself constantly looking toward the windows and listening for unusual sounds in the hallway. The dark car was still parked across the street, which Agent Chen had told him would be there every night for the foreseeable future. Marcus realized that accepting Colonel Hayes' third option meant that he would never again experience the simple pleasure of walking across campus without wondering if someone was watching him. Every conversation with classmates would now carry the possibility that he might accidentally reveal something that could put himself or others in danger. At the same time, Marcus felt a connection to his father that he had never experienced before. For the first time in his life, he was walking in David's footsteps and beginning to understand the weight of responsibility his father had carried every day. The tattoo on his shoulder no longer felt like just a memorial to a man he had lost. It felt like a commitment to continue the work David had started. As Marcus finally drifted off to sleep, he wondered how long it would take for Viktor Petrov and his associates to contact him again, and whether he would be ready when they did. 5 days after his training began, Viktor Petrov called Marcus on his regular cell phone. Marcus was in the middle of his mechanical engineering lab when the phone rang. Following his training, he let it go to voicemail and waited until he was alone to listen to the message. Marcus, this is Victor. I hope you have had time to consider our conversation. Meet me at the Henderson Mall food court tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone and bring any information your father may have left behind. This is your opportunity to resolve this situation peacefully. Marcus immediately called Agent Chen using the secure phone. Within an hour, she was at his apartment with a small team of technicians who equipped him with nearly invisible recording devices and a tracking beacon that looked like an ordinary college ID badge. Remember, Agent Chen said as they went over the plan one final time. Your job is just to get him talking. Let him tell you what he's really after and who he's working with. We'll have people positioned throughout the mall, but we need evidence of what crimes he's planning before we can make any arrests. The next afternoon, Marcus arrived at the mall 15 minutes early, just as he had been trained. He used the time to identify the locations of Agent Chen's team members, who were positioned as ordinary shoppers throughout the food court. Marcus ordered a sandwich and found a table where he could watch the entrances. Victor arrived exactly on time, carrying the same leather briefcase he had brought to the library. He looked more tense than he had during their first meeting, glancing around nervously as he approached Marcus's table. You came alone. That was wise, Victor said as he sat down. I don't have any information to give you, Marcus replied, following the script he had rehearsed. My father never talked about his work. Victor opened his briefcase and pulled out several photographs. They were surveillance photos of Marcus, walking to class, leaving work, entering his apartment building. We have been watching you, Marcus. We know about your meetings with military personnel. We know about your training sessions, Marcus. Felt his stomach drop, but he tried to keep his expression neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. Please don't insult my intelligence. We followed you to that office building. We know you are working with the same people who destroyed our operations. Victor's accent seemed to get thicker when he was angry. This changes our arrangement significantly. Victor pulled out more photographs, these showing Agent Chen and other team members. Your new friends cannot protect you everywhere all the time. My associates are very patient people, and they have long memories. What do you want from me? Marcus asked, genuinely confused about how Victor's people had managed to identify and photograph a classified intelligence operation. Since you have chosen to work with our enemies, you will now help us identify them. You will provide us with names, locations, and operational details about the people you have been meeting with. Victor slid a small device across the table. It looked like a modified cell phone. This device will record everything that happens in your training sessions. You will also use it to photograph any documents or computer screens you have access to. Marcus picked up the device, knowing that Agent Chen and her team were recording everything. What happens if I refuse? Victor smiled coldly. Your college has many students, Marcus. Some of them spend time with you in study groups. Some of them work with you at the bookstore. Accidents happen to college students every day. Car crashes, falls downstairs, food poisoning. It would be very sad if your friends began experiencing these kinds of accidents. This was the threat Agent Chen had been waiting for. Victor had just confessed to planning to harm innocent civilians, which gave the team legal authority to arrest him and his associates. Marcus saw Agent Chen approaching their table, along with several other team members who were converging from